Um, The Bradamus Center is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And this is the 17th year we've done this conference. John Bradamus, just to invoke his memory, in whose name this is named, was a member of Congress for over 20 years, and then president emeritus of New York University for another 20 years. He believed passionately in the importance of bringing together thinkers and doers across a wide spectrum of opinion and having them engage in civil conversations about what could be often controversial matters. So I'm delighted that we are able to continue that legacy, and especially in such capable hands. And I will turn the podium over to the moderator of the first panel, professor at NYU, political science, Patrick Egan. Take it away, Pat.
So it's great to be here. Thank you, Lynn, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor to be moderating this first panel for the 2025 edition of Inside American Politics here at Oxford. And wonderful to see so many familiar faces among our panelists and also a lot of new folks, and a warm welcome to everybody. As Lynn said, my name is Patrick Egan. I'm a professor of politics and public policy at NYU in New York. And you note that at NYU, we sometimes have to do that redundancy, NYU in New York, because we have these campuses all over the world that have students and faculty, including here in the UK at NYU London. I'm a member of the advisory board of the Bradamus Center, and I understand that I'm also a senior fellow, which sounds great. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I love it. That's right, exactly. That's right. The Irish promotion, as I understand it, as we call it. So what topic we have today? The Trump era in historical perspective. We've been given this question, which I think is a great one to inspire our thoughts, and we're going to get to it shortly. The question is, what does the Trump presidency fit? Sorry, where does the Trump presidency fit in the broader arc of American history, drawing comparisons with past eras marked by deep partisanship, charismatic populist figures, and expansive uses of executive power? So I'm going to have a couple of words to say about that, but I'm going to really let our panelists talk about that. But what I first want to do is briefly introduce our panelists. The biographies I have here will not do all of their luminary careers justice, but I want to be quick in the interest of time. So right to my left is Eugene Daniels, who is senior Washington correspondent for the network currently known as MSNBC, but on Saturday, it will be renamed MS Now. He is co-host of the network's The Weekend program and joined the network in 2021 after serving as chief playbook correspondent and White House correspondent for Politico. Before that, also a distinguished career in political journalism. Welcome, Eugene. To his left is Joe McLean, a longtime Democratic strategist who was part of the founding leadership team for Barack Obama's successful U.S. Senate race in Illinois. He also managed Governor Douglas Wilder's historic election in Virginia, as well as engineering dark horse victories in California, Michigan, and Kentucky. Those dark horse victories sound very exciting. I want to know more about those. Yes. Joe also served as president and CFO of Heflin & Company, Inc., a commercial construction company in Nashville, and brings a lot of his wisdom from that part of our country to his insights on American politics. He is a fifth-generation cotton farmer in his family farm in Quincy, Tennessee. Welcome, Joe. To his left, we have Jim Rutenburg, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and writer-at-large for the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine. He focuses on the intersection of media and politics and has served as White House correspondent, City Hall bureau chief, national political correspondent, and media columnist for the Times. Jim attended NYU, and just like many of our most distinguished alumni, did not graduate from NYU. He's in good company with, say, Lady Gaga, for example. And so no shame at leaving NYU before leaving a diploma, particularly if you go on to the kind of career that Jim has had. He is now at work on a forthcoming book on the ideological battles shaping the national newsfeed. Welcome, Jim. And last but not least, to his left, we have Matt Gruda, a Republican strategist and campaign manager who has had just a string of really impressive successes. He recently directed Senator Dave McCormick's successful run to unseat former Democratic Senator Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, which in some ways was the most hard-fought Senate campaign in that cycle in 2024. His campaign career includes work with current Secretary of State and former Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, who regularly wins nail-biter races in probably the most swingy district that you're going to see in American politics, located in the Philadelphia suburbs. A warm welcome to you, Matt, as well. Thanks for being here. I'll just quickly acknowledge, because you have to say it, we're a manel. Sorry, we're all guys, but that's how it worked out. So But
I have nail polish.
There we go. There is some lightning to that maleness here. To move to serious business, I want to acknowledge that today is Remembrance Day here in the UK, and it's also Veterans Day in the United States. And these days mark the end of World War I, armistice of World War I, and our two nations' joint commemoration of that historical event, I think, brings us back to thinking a little bit about the historical perspective on American politics. And so I'll just read this question once again and give you a couple of thoughts here. Where does the Trump presidency fit in the broader arc of American history? And we want to draw comparisons with past eras marked by deep partisanship, charismatic populist figures, and expansive uses of executive power. So I have sort of three eras and three presidencies that I think are on the minds of a lot of us tonight. An era marked by deep partisanship. Political scientists measure polarization and partisanship in a lot of ways. One of them is just looking at how different the two parties are in Congress. Do they vote on opposite sides on a regular, persistent basis? We are at, I think, either nearly or all-time high in terms of polarization in the U.S. Congress by that measure. The last time it was about this high was in the Gilded Age, so around the turn of the 20th century, when you had, again, the Republican and Democratic Party at each other's throats and regularly taking very different positions on lots of important issues of the day. Like today, that was an issue, an era marked by intense inequality, massive growth in wealth, and a lot of immigration that had its own immigration politics that in some ways look like the immigration politics of today in the United States. And to think about that era, I think is kind of helpful. We think about somebody like Teddy Roosevelt as being at the helm of the presidency at that era. Lots of differences and similarities between a Teddy Roosevelt and a Trump, and we can kind of think about that together. If I think about charismatic populist figures, you have to go to somebody like Andrew Jackson, I think, who basically invents populism in his era of American history. He basically takes this party system that is dominated by elites and says, this isn't working for the people. I'm going to revolutionize politics and make it much more retail. I'm going to bring a lot of voters in. Voter turnout goes way, way up. That's exactly what happened when Trump runs in 2016. Basically, American politics was never the same after Andrew Jackson became president. In many ways, the two parties were much more democratic with a small d after Jackson's ascent. And in terms of expansive uses of executive power, well, you could go to somewhere like FDR, right? So FDR presides over the growth of a giant administrative state that is put in place in part to fight World War II, but also to realize the long-held beliefs of social democrats in the Democratic Party that give birth to the New Deal. That gives birth to a wide-ranging administrative state that funds and oversees lots of social safety net programs in the United States and is really the beginning of the massive growth of the executive branch. So three presidents there, if we think about TR, Andrew Jackson, and FDR. What I want to make clear is that something that's different about today from those eras, and there's a lot of ways that it's different, but one of them is that we have a president who is very happy to exercise power from his seat as head of the executive branch. And he is at the head of a giant executive branch, one that arguably has never had as much influence on American life as it does now. We see this in our universities, where federal funds are vital to the running of universities and funding many students' tuitions. We see this in media, where it turns out that media companies, because they seek approval from the federal government for mergers and acquisitions, have to stay on the good side of a president who wants to use executive power to take action on media. We see this in health, where we have a health secretary who's in a sense, single-handedly revolutionizing how the federal government approves, thinks about drugs, thinks about healthcare, et cetera. So I think what is unprecedented about this era is an executive branch leader, a president who wants to use and is happy to break a lot of norms in using executive branch power to achieve his ends. And what is unprecedented about that is that he's got quite a lot at his disposal in terms of what to use, in terms of resources, power, personnel, et cetera. So we have parallels from the past. We also have distinctions from the past. And I think with that, I'm going to turn to our panelists to have them answer this question as well, what kinds of parallels you see from the past, and then we'll have a general discussion. And maybe I'll start from the very end. Matt, if you don't mind beginning for us, and we'll come this way.
Sure. Well, thanks for everyone for being here today. It's great to see so many young faces that are engaged and interested in what we up here have to talk about. I think I'll start with, it's, as you guys could tell from my bio, I'm much more of a political hack than I am a policy guy in any way.
Yes.
Definitely happy to be that way. But in terms of the partisanship, I think that we see in this era and the polarization, I think I would frame it in a way of looking at how we got here. And I think that there were a lot of incremental steps along the way from previous administrations that each administration sees what the last administration does and takes it to the next level. And you can tell from whether it's judicial confirmations, back when Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader, and how we got to the point of confirming Supreme Court justices today, to executive orders that previous administrations have done, and then the record number of executive orders that President Trump did on his first day in office. So I think that when you look at it from a historical perspective, it's important to take into account the previous administration's actions and try to put it into the perspective of how different is it in reality. And I would push back on the narrative that we're living in a very different reality today than at any other time in our nation's history, especially when you hear a lot of time about democracy being at stake and what is the next election going to look like. We just had elections in the United States this past week, and everything went normal. Democrats won a lot of Democratic states, and we'll have another election next year, the first week of November. So I think when you look at it from the historical perspective, again, I think Ronald Reagan is another great comparison to how President Trump conducts himself in terms of his ability to capture an audience. I think before President Trump, one would say that the Republican that could capture an audience unlike any other was Ronald Reagan. But you look at today, I think one of the biggest questions people have about the future of the Republican Party is who takes that mantle from President Trump and his ability to capture an audience like he's been able to. He has discovered very well that he can send out one Truth Social post, and that can command the news cycle for the next 24 hours. It's remarkable what he's able to do to drive the conversation, set the agenda, and push the agenda through Congress. Again, whether it's through executive orders or whether it's through Congress. I think when we saw the first piece of legislation, or one of the reconciliation bill that was passed through Congress, there were a lot of doubts that you could get a package like that through even a united Congress in terms of it being controlled by the same party. But it didn't take that much in terms of other reconciliation bills that have gone through Congress. You didn't see as much of the knockout, drag out fights that typically take place when passing through that kind of piece of legislation. I do also want to just talk about the expanded use of power that was mentioned inside of in that first question. And I think bringing it back to what I said at first in terms of looking at previous administrations and how they handled their executive power, and using that to dictate what are we looking at today. Every president had their reason for using executive power, whether it be this is a promise they campaigned on, or this isn't getting through Congress and I want to see it done now. And I think when you look at going back one administration to the Biden administration, there were plenty of uses of expanded power when it came to COVID. Under Obama, you saw it with immigration on his side when it came to DACA and the parents of those minors that were brought over the border. Now, President Trump campaigned on a lot of things. I struggle to find something that he did not campaign on that he's doing today. I think he is doing what he said. So in terms of, again, tying it back to the historical, where his presidency, how his presidency compares in historical terms, I think it really is a lot of action. And I would look no further when comparing him to a Republican, just looking at Ronald Reagan and how he conducted himself in terms of being, again, capturing the audience and being able to go directly to the American people and sell what he wanted to be done through Congress or done through the executive power.
Great, thanks, Matt. Jim, what are your thoughts on this broad topic?
It's very broad. Well, before I want to tee up one thing Matt said, just it's a little, just to open up the topic. And it's interesting. You said Trump did everything he said. And that was one of the first lessons I learned in covering politics is listen to what the candidates say, because that's what they're going to do. And it almost always does turn out that way. Just in terms of the historical sweep that you provided, I think one thing that's really interesting about FDR is that he used executive power to build up what now is called the administrative state. And what Trump is doing, and Reagan did a bit of too, is using executive power to diminish the administrative state. I mean, that's like, their avowed goal. So it's interesting how those are two very different goals, but through the same sort of means. My orientation is very much in media. And in all of these cases, media was this huge factor. I think it's sort of the life's blood of all of this. So I think of two presidencies a lot, and I'm writing a book that sort of traces, as you mentioned, this fight over what I call the news feed, what we all now call the news feed, but always was a news feed. And I start the book in the Nixon administration, and there are a lot of very fascinating parallels that I'm sort of grappling with in a current piece. And that's that where Trump is breaking down the administrative state, he's using it on the FCC level in ways that Nixon talked about doing. Nixon, I've spent hours in these Oval Office recordings listening to Nixon talk about, well, let's use the regulatory power we have over these television stations to pressure them to pressure their big mother networks. I don't know if you guys have a different television environment, but we started with 3 big networks, private, and they have hundreds of stations, and they're run by different people. So the idea in the Nixon era was we'll pressure the stations that are more like us or in red states and Republican to pressure their mother networks to be more in line with what we think the news should be. And Nixon didn't really get to do that because Watergate happened. He had officials who weren't willing to kind of use regulatory power that way. We have a different First Amendment than your free speech laws here. It's much more open. But so that's been a fascinating parallel for Trump, there's that use of the administrative state, yet there's another part of the media environment that's completely unregulated, and he and his party have shown a great mastery of it. They really understand how it works, and that's taken his populism and put it on steroids. I think it's kind of something that the Democrats have struggled to match, and it's a lesson for everyone in media. In terms of Reagan, what's interesting about him is, yes, I agree with Matt, everything he said about the way he sold what he was doing. He was dealing with probably a Congress that asserted itself a bit more, but very similar. Reagan on the media front complained about reporters all the time, as all presidents do, like Trump, talk to us more than they let on, right? As Trump does too. But Reagan really was the one who started a Republican trend, a conservative trend to not ever use regulations against media. That they basically, his FCC, that's, you guys have Ofcom, right? We have the FCC. His FCC said, we're not going to even enforce these rules anymore. And so that was a big difference. But it really, Reagan was so charismatic that he mastered his medium of the time. So anyway, there are tons of parallels. We can keep talking about them. That's going to be my frame. It's usually media, for good or for ill.
Great, thank you, Jim. Joe, what are your thoughts here?
Well, there is an innate tension between populism and elitism that's a thread that runs throughout American history. If you think about the Whiskey Rebellion, if you think about the conflict between Jefferson and Hamilton right at the founding of the Republic, that was classic. Jefferson was a populist, Hamilton elitist. Jacksonian democracy, and then when you get into Roosevelt and the reaction to the Gilded Age, again, Roosevelt was part of the elite, but aligned with populists with the square deal and big reforms. And then, of course, FDR, probably the biggest reforms and the biggest changes in the way we approach government and the social contract in American history. And the thing that is the common thread through all of these, and I may be missing one, I just try not to drool when I'm up here with these really smart people. But the common thread that runs through that is they all occurred during periods of great social and cultural change and pressure. You think about the Depression and what was going on, but the Gilded Age is probably even a better example. The Industrial Revolution was literally revolutionizing the way we live around the world, and particularly in Great Britain and the United States and Western Europe. We went from something like 80% of the population living on farms to now at 0.2% or something. It's like, but the big shift happened within about 30 years. And again, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Can you imagine the social upheaval? And if you've ever read Upton Sinclair, and I bet you did because you had to read it in junior high, right? And so you get a real feel for how people felt and how they had to live and the reaction to that. And that's what you have now. We are living in an era of social and cultural change as dramatic. I would say you can disagree because you're way smarter than I am about that. But it's as dramatic as it was during the Gilded Age. You think about between immigration and the shifts in employment. We've already shifted away from manufacturing into the information age, and now we're shifting into something else, and we don't really know what that's going to be. So people feel that pressure, and they're afraid because the truths that they lived by for generations are now passing away. The largest segment of religion in America are the nuns. Christianity is failing or fading. Other religions have never been that big. Catholic Church is growing a little bit, but not much. But the largest religious segment are the nuns, people who don't go to church anywhere.
Oh, those nuns. What are you mean?
N-O-N-E-S.
Y'all thought he meant nuns too, like the ladies in the habit. Yeah. Like, thank you, Kiki. Thank you. I was like, a nun.
This is why I'm a political hack and not a journalist or an academic. Okay, we'll just go there. Anyway, I just think it's fascinating to watch what's happening right now. I watch it with great concern for our country because we are in this period of upheaval. Yeah. And we don't know how this is going to come out yet.
A lot of what you guys say, I agree with. I think the one I didn't expect, Whiskey Rebellion, to be brought up. But I appreciate that. For those that don't know, look it up. I think one of the things that's most interesting now and different than these other times when they're talking about populism is that the populism of Andrew Jackson was real. Right? When he was talking about, I want to help the everyday man, it was real. Now, Matt, you may disagree with me, but when Donald Trump talks about, I am the representative of the everyday man, this is a billionaire who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, who spent a lot of time in New York City failing upwards, which is just a fact. You can look it up. And when you talk about him doing what he promised to make things cheaper for folks, right? And what he's worked on has been the tariffs, which have almost every economist will tell you is a tax on the American people and the public and the folks who put him in office. And spending so much more time on foreign policy than he is domestic policy. Steve Bannon, I assume you guys know who Steve Bannon on how internationally, he took a deep breath, so he knows who he is. Steve Bannon has been coming out and complaining and hitting Trump for focusing so much on foreign policy and not the domestic policy. Because what Trump did in 2024, which is impressive, was not just bring people out who don't vote, he convinced people who would typically vote for Democrats if they did come out to vote for him. I've been calling them borrowed voters. Some people call them rented. Jonathan Capehart on our show calls them leased. That tells you the difference in all of our thinking. But these are folks who wouldn't have voted for him otherwise. And the way to keep those kinds of people on your side is to do the things that they want and they needed and what they heard, right? They heard and felt that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made things too expensive for them. Whether you agree with that feeling or not, that's what voters were telling us as reporters, as political hacks. That's what they were saying. That's why Donald Trump won the election. What you're hearing now, what you're seeing in the data, the polls, is that because he hasn't actually been working on things that make things cheaper for people, they are moving away from him. Those borrowed voters, when you think of New Jersey, and we were talking about this last night, Megan, the New Jersey gubernatorial race. In New Jersey in 2024, the Latino vote, Democrats only won it by 3 points in 2024. Last week, they won it by 37 points, right? That's just a little bit of a year difference. That tells you something. And what that tells you is that people want things to be cheaper. So when Donald Trump talks as a populist, the question is, for me as a reporter, are the policies following that talk? And frankly, it's not. I was one of 20 reporters at the inauguration because it was inside the Capitol. And what was so fascinating, I think tells you so much about how Donald Trump is so different than any of the other politicians that we're talking about and his kind of theory of the case as a populist, is that all of those tech guys were sitting in front of the cabinet secretaries, right? The people the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Joe Bezos, and all of those folks were sitting in front of that. And that tells you something about how the Trump then transition, now administration, kind of thinks about all of this. Donald Trump isn't really surrounded by a bunch of people who are worried about making things cheaper for folks, right? It's just true. The other day, as folks were losing their SNAP benefits, which is food aid benefits, I don't know what you guys call it here, he had a Gilded Age party, or a Great Gatsby party at Mar-a-Lago, and the theme was a little party ain't never hurt nobody. Then that's not true. But the difference in how Donald Trump is operating this time and last time is he used to have a very clear understanding of perception, right? The reason Donald Trump is so popular now is because he was having folks perceive him as as a great businessman, when the fact sheet was different than that, right? And so he did this, he did the TV show where he was firing people, and it made him think that, this is a successful businessman. He's been very good at perception, not so much now. And so my question is always, what does that end up looking like? But there's also the policy aspect where people are actually getting hurt by those policies. And when you talk about, other Congresses standing up to whether it's Nixon or some of these other folks who were kind of trying to expand the administrative state or take on the administrative state, Trump's Congress the Congress right now is not in any way, the Republicans in Congress, not in any way, shape, or form standing up. And when you talk to them behind the scenes, some of them are true believers, right? Some of them really believe in the things that Donald Trump is saying. I would say most of them that I talk to Whether, you talk about the Marjorie Taylor Greens all the way to the Don Bacons, the moderates, they're mostly scared of him and scared of losing their jobs, right? They're up every 2 years in the House, losing their jobs. And now they're scared of actually being hurt because the rise of political violence. And so the difference of the now and then, I think it's so extraordinary because when you look at polls, the American people are much more likely to say than ever before that we're okay with political violence to reach a political ends. And that is something that as folks in the media, folks that are in politics, like we all have to figure out how to wrestle with and what that tells us about the country that we're covering and living in. And the last thing I'll say about kind of the expanding the presidential power, every president has done it, right? They, as Jim said, they hate us. They're always mean to us. But the difference with Trump and some of these other folks who expanded the presidential power is that they had a real respect for the Constitution. You say what you want about Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon knew and believed in the Constitution, right? He's kind of colored outside the lines. But when you talk to folks, to say the least, when you talk to folks around Donald Trump, is they will say like, no, he doesn't really care. He wants to get things done. And that's their sell, is that, the Constitution can sometimes be a roadblock. That was the point of the Constitution, right? It's actually creates lanes in which you're supposed to operate in. And the last thing I'll say this time is on the 19th of January, I was at an event in DC. Inauguration was the next day. And I was talking to someone who is now in the DOJ. I said, so what y'all up to? Tell me, what you gonna do? And he said, we are going to stretch the bounds. And I said, of? And he said, everything. Mm-hmm. And that tells you everything you need to know about why this time feels different to a lot of Americans, why history will look at it and I think remark on how different it was than these other movements and other times in history where we had similar ingredients. And Donald Trump's kind of singular focus on winning and being seen as strong is what drives him beyond anything else. And that's not me saying that. That is people that worked with him before and people that still currently work with him now.
Patrick, let me just say one thing too. Just going back to the historical perspective, the populism doesn't always win.
Right.
Remember William Jennings Bryan ran for president 3 times. Prairie populism. We'll not be crucified on a cross of gold, right? He lost 3 times. Populism doesn't always win. So that's what I'm saying. It's going to be really fascinating to watch what happens in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think what makes, a kind of a nice question to kind of take us further is to kind of think about whether you like what Trump is doing or you don't like what Trump is doing, if you find what he's doing appealing or if you find what he's doing disturbing. One question that arises is, to what extent do these charismatic executive branch folks face guardrails when they're trying to expand their power and get things done? And again, if you like Trump, you're going to find those guardrails as an impediment to the stuff you want to see happen. And if you don't like him, you're going to hope that those guardrails are there to keep him from doing those things. But I think those guardrails are always there throughout history in one way or the other. And I wonder if anyone has a thought about what we know from the successes and failures of past leaders that gives us a sense of where those guardrails might be now.
Yeah, I think the American democracy survives in part because of those guardrails that are in place. The fact that we can look to tomorrow and know that there will be a tomorrow and it won't look that much different than yesterday. The specific I think if you look at my new role within Leader Thune's political operation, one of the biggest guardrails that exists in the U.S. Senate that also affects what happens on the presidency side is the filibuster. I think there are a lot of Republicans that understand the benefits and the necessity of keeping the filibuster in place. And for those of you that don't know, the filibuster it requires 60 votes to pass any legislation in the Senate, except for reconciliation, which still requires a majority. And that doesn't apply to judges. It just applies to the filibuster today. Just applies to lower court judges, but not this applies to normal pieces of legislation that go from the House to the Senate. They're obvious. The president has made it very clear that he would love to see the filibuster removed. He
All
spent,
caps.
he spent the last week of the government shutdown asking for changes to the rules. I think in part because he has moved at such a quick pace, a faster pace than I think any other president has moved in their first year in office. In part because he had 4 years to prepare for his next first year. He knew what he wanted to accomplish in year one. So he viewed the government shutdown as stopping the progress and his ability to quickly act on his agenda. The filibuster is again something that stopped the Senate actions. Fortunately, Leader Thune was able to navigate without having to remove the filibuster to get Democrats on board, enough Democrats on board, 8 Democrats on board to pass through government funding that again funded some of those benefits like SNAP that Eugene mentioned that were being defunded essentially because of the government shutdown that the Democrats were holding over the American people. I think that if you look towards the future, though, who are the Democrats this time around that are going to protect the filibuster is a great question to ask. The last time the Democrats were in power, you had Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema as the only 2 Democrats that voted to protect the filibuster. Neither of those 2 exist right now in the U.S. Senate. So I think it's a great question to ask ourselves and ask our leaders in office, who is going to be that Democrat that then steps forward to help protect some of these institutions from changing in a way that will dramatically change the way our democracy is day in and day out.
All brilliant. So I'm not going to argue with the political maestro. And by the way, Thune, we should talk about that. I mean, he's really the most important Republican in the Senate right now. And Matt's working, you lead his political operation, right? But one thing I want to say about populism is when it has a head of steam, I think all the checks in the American system do tend to weaken no matter what. I mean, you could look at any president. We haven't talked about George W. Bush, whose Vice President Dick Cheney was a big pusher of like a strong, big executive power. He really wanted to expand it. And after 9/11 in the US, Bush could do anything. He could get Congress to do what he wanted. He could change laws in terms of domestic surveillance, sometimes not. He could wage wars with the country fully behind him. He had media. We used to talk about it in terms of what we call a Fox effect, but Fox News rose during Bush, and Fox News rose by really having Bush's back and the rest of the press saying, oh, especially on television, that's where the ratings are, so we better go there. So populism, when it's working for a president, really weakens the guardrails no matter what. I think the question now is with Trump, you have one check, and again, sorry, I'll always go here, but one check on executive power was always the press. The press is suffering with big trust problems. It's under attack as never before, and there are these new sources of information. I don't even know if you can call it information that will kind of melt, can let anyone make a case for anything, no matter where the facts are. That's an entirely new thing in human history at this kind of scale, entirely new. We had pamphlets, we can talk about, there were versions of it, but nothing where it's in hundreds of millions of pockets all day long with none of the, whatever you think about journalism, and I'm here for any critiques. I was the media critic at the paper. You had journalistic expectations of verification. You had all sorts of other problems, but you did have that. So that's different. So whereas that check is kind of right now gone, this Congress is particularly pliant for Trump, though Leader Thune protected the filibuster against the president's wishes. So that was a moment where Congress did assert itself. And then you have law enforcement and the Department of Justice, which now, like the press, suffers from with trust issues, and a president who really wants to as Eugene said, they've said they want to press the limits. So again, how long lasting all of that is will be the question, but populism right now fuels everything because it's working. And I don't think that's necessarily new in our system.
Why? Why does populism rise? Why do authoritarians arise? Authoritarians, all through history, authoritarians have risen when regular government doesn't work. They meet a need. And Patrick and I talked about this before. You can go back to Rome and talk about why the Republic fell. It's because it didn't work. The government didn't work. You'll know the answer. One of you guys who are a lot smarter than me will know the answer to this. How long has it been since we had 13 appropriations bills? 25 years?
Decades.
Decades. We don't have a budget. We don't have a government that works. And when people talk about, I hate that damn government, the government does it, they're not talking about the federal government. The actual bureaucracy, it works. It does what Congress has charged it to do. And generally, there's always waste and there are always problems. I would submit to you no more so than any large corporation or any other large organization, but there are always problems. There are always problems with any large organization. Can we make government work better? Of course we can. But fundamentally, the federal government works and our state governments work, okay? And they work in very different ways. You know, one of my good friends who used to be a governor says, what do state governments do? They medicate, incarcerate, and educate. And that's it. If you look at state budgets, everything else is like 0.1%. Everything else states spend money on. They do those three things. What does the federal government spend money on? They pay your grandfather and grandmother. They defend the country. And they provide health care. That's pretty much it. Everything else is like 10% of the budget. You know, we're fighting over crumbs. What doesn't work? Congress. Congress hasn't worked. I worked for Congress in the I'm old, right? I'm an old guy up here. I worked for Congress in the 70s when it actually functioned. Congress hasn't functioned for decades. So if you want to know what's wrong with the government and why we have presidents pushing against the system and expanding their power, it's because somebody's got to make a decision. Somebody's got to do something. Why didn't Congress work? You guys vote for them. I mean, it's an easy thing to blame the voters. I get that. I mean, I totally understand that. But the system is broken and we need to figure out how to make the Congress work. Because right now, Democrats, who should be the loyal opposition, have exactly no power. None. The only thing is cloture. We talk about the filibuster. It's actually cloture, where you vote to close debate and bring a bill to the floor of the Senate. In the House, absolutely no power. The Speaker runs everything. So, you know, I hear people complaining, why don't the Democrats do something? Yeah, what? What are we going to do? We can talk to her blue in the face and we have exactly no power. They control the White House, the House, and the Senate. And the reason why presidents, whether it's Trump or Roosevelt or any other president or some Roman dictator, the reason why the authoritarianism works, why dictators rise, and I'm not saying Trump's a dictator, don't misunderstand me, but the reason why dictators rise is because the government doesn't work and people want it to work.
And really, we're seeing that happen across all the rich democracies.
Absolutely.
Right. So here in the UK, you had a Labour landslide, and now Starmer's in the dumps, right? I think I have that right.
20%.
Yeah. So, or Macron in France, the tumult among the party system in Japan, Canada's leader Mark Carney rode on the wave of an anti-Trump sentiment. He's not looking so good. And so I think there is something going on in the rich democracies right now where governments, for one reason or another, and I think part of it has to do with their legislators, but not just their legislators, are not delivering on what people seem to want from them. A lot of it has to do with cost of living. But I think there's also something fundamentally more existential about people's dissatisfaction with these governments. And it's not just happening in the United States. And so I agree, Joe, that leaves these systems open to all kinds of different sorts of solutions that feel revolutionary, whether that's a Trump or frankly, that's Zoran Mamdani in New York City, right? So people are looking for big, bold change. And we've just had a series of these change elections over and over again in the United States. And I think it's happening all over the world. Looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, it was not, no. I think part of the biggest issue, and this is, and I think this is not just in the United States, I think it's everywhere, as Patrick's saying, is the incentive structure is all messed up, all cussed. And the incentive structure in the United States for members of Congress is not to get stuff done, right? It's not to go there and like sit in a room and have a real discussion and hammer out a solution. The incentive structure, and Donald Trump didn't create this, but he did help exacerbate this, and the MAGA coalition has helped exacerbate this, is to force the opposition to do what you want instead of figuring out a compromise, right? And when you talk to members of Congress, a lot of them are saying, we want to sit in a room and talk. Well, go do it. No one's stopping you. Like no one is stopping you from calling each other. Hakeem Jeffries was complaining, who's the leader of Democrats in the House, was saying that he hadn't talked to Speaker Johnson. You got a phone? Call him. You have his number. You know where his office is, right? And Mike Johnson was saying the same thing. So you have this world in which they don't go there to fix anything, right? They see it, a lot of them, as a launching pad to something else. They see it as a way to protect certain interest groups, right? And one of the reasons that populism hasn't worked in the United States is because the folks who go up and say, like, I'm a populist, I'm going to do all the things, the amount of power that the elite have in our federal government is more than you can absolutely imagine, right? The inability to get things done is not because the voters messed up or because they can't find the rooms to sit down. A lot of it has to do with the outside pressures that are keeping them from making things work for everyday people. So when you talk about populism and Andrew Jackson talking about the everyday man, the Congress now, when they're talking about who's gonna protect them, and I'm talking about people when I talk to them behind the scenes, when you talk to them about who's going to protect you and keep you in Congress, they don't think about Bob and Lisa that run the store in the town. They're thinking about who are the people with that can write the big checks. And so it creates an entirely different incentive structure than democracies are actually supposed to have. And one other thing I'll say about what we're seeing that's different than any of these other times is, as they were expanding their presidential power, they were trying to do it quietly. And Trump is very loud about it. And it has created, when you talk to voters, this idea, and he has been saying it forever, that the system was broken, it was broken for other people, but don't blame those people. The people who should be getting the blame, again, are kind of like the rich elite. Like if you're a populist, the rich elite are the bad guys, right? That's who you should be telling your voters are the bad guys. But that's not what's happening, right? It's that this scary bureaucracy of random people who have given their life to public service, they're the bad guys and gals. Those are the people who are the enemy. Mm-hmm. And that's not true, right? Like when you talk to some, and we've had a bunch of those folks on our show during the shutdown, these are people who got into it, especially a lot of Black and brown people, because the promise of the federal government was that they were going to be able to lift themselves up out of poverty into a job that would be consistent and stable, right? That's what everybody wants. Our Congress does not believe that. And so when they're operating and moving and shaking, and again, this is the difference between now and all these other times, is they're not thinking about those everyday people. I'm sorry, they're not. There are many that do. I don't want to be unfair. There are many that do, but there are not enough, right? And every day there's less and less of those. And what you're seeing with the Democratic base and with the left side of the Democratic Party is that they want to see people who will fight. They're like, we don't care if you don't have power, right? Mm-hmm. What are you going to do? That's what the shutdown fight was about, right? The shutdown fight was about proving that even without sitting in the seat of power, you were going to be willing to put your neck and your job on the line for the everyday people. right? Democrats chose healthcare, which is a great topic for them to talk about. They've been talking about and trying to fix healthcare forever. And the reason people are pissed that they vote, oh yeah, pissed is a bad word here. I know, I'm sorry. I got in trouble on the BBC one time. I asked my husband, they had to apologize for it. They're like, he's American. But the reason that folks are so upset with Schumer and these eight senators, Schumer voted no, to be clear, but the 8 senators who voted for to open the government back up, is they didn't get anything back, right? You didn't get anything. You fought for 40 days. And you didn't actually get the thing you promised. You should make Kiki shaking her head. You didn't actually, you didn't actually get the thing that you promised. You promised that you were going to get these Affordable Care Act subsidies reinstated. You didn't get that. And so what was the 40 days for? And what Democrats fail to understand when they're trying to be populists is that you have to, if you're going to tussle, you have to get something at the end of it. Republicans understand that. Republicans understand that if you're going to tussle, there has to be something at the end of the rainbow. And even if you have to expand the bounds of power, they're going to do it. Now, that tears at our institutions. That makes us less of a democracy and a representative democracy. But it seems like people are less interested in that nowadays, right? They want to see their prices go down. There's such a difference between the haves and the have-nots that you can no longer really think about politics as like who's on the left and who's on the right. You can no longer say like race is the determining factor about how people are going to vote. It's not. It's how much they make and what education they have. That's how people decide who they're going to vote for. He doesn't agree. We're going to talk after this. But in America, that is like that. When you look at polling, when people move around, that's what they're moving around for. And because of the speed at which we get things on our phones, people are trained to get things immediately. And so when they tell the people in power, we want prices cheaper, they mean tomorrow. Even if there's all these things that you actually have to get done. So even the incentive structure for voters is off. They're like, well, you said you're going to get it done tomorrow. Nothing happens tomorrow. Our economy is not built to move that quickly. It's built to move very slowly and turn very slowly for a reason, to not shake things up. And so if voters don't change the way they're thinking, that the immediate is not coming, and politicians aren't really working to get things done for the most Americans, I don't know how this thing continues to work in the way that it was promised.
Matt, I want to ask a question about Andrew Jackson, because that is certainly somebody who President Trump has embraced as kind of an inspiration for his presidency and a lot of his action. Could you maybe say a little bit about what about Andrew Jackson is appealing to Trump and those who are enamored with what Trump is trying to do and getting done?
I'll lead with the fact again, I am a political hack. Let's make that clear. No,
even the popular understanding.
Sure. No,
that is, yeah.
Sure. I think it's the boldness of Andrew Jackson that Trump finds so appealing. And it's the decisiveness, it's that part, it's what is remembered of not policy achievements, but more so the way he conducted himself in terms of just quick moving, fast, bold action that Trump looks at as a businessman. That's his background, is being in business. And, from having worked for a businessman who's now a U.S. senator, also having worked for someone who was a career politician in a different race, I have seen the difference in the way that they view speed of action and how they place importance of speed of action. And I think that if to narrow the scope to again, I think President Trump himself looks at many of the different presidencies that preceded him in terms of how he views himself and how he wants to be remembered and how he wants to compare to others. But I've never worked for President Trump, so I'm not positive on this. But in my view of it is probably more on the boldness side of how Andrew Jackson was as president.
Well, yeah, but okay, good. We want to thank you, everybody. We're going to go to questions from our audience, and tell me how we're going to do this. We have microphones coming around. All right. And if you'd like to ask a question, Raise your hand and we'll come around to you.
The panelists.
That's right. Yeah, feel free to. Yes, we like a question and we like short questions.
Well, I have a mic, so I'm assuming I'm allowed to speak. Is that?
Yeah, and tell us your name and where you're from.
I'm Alex. I'm originally from the UK. I grew up internationally, did a bit of college in the US before here, UPenn. So, you know, me, Trump, Luigi Mangione, much in common. But a question I want to ask sort of brought up from a bit slightly earlier. Eugene, you were talking about it a bit, but I'd love everyone's perspective on this, specifically the others and also Matt from the more Republican side. Talking about historical perspective, the difference between the current Trump administration and the 2016 Trump administration, because I would talk about this a lot, but I'll leave it to the experts. There's a different, from day one, from the election, there's been a different energy about it. And the trajectory of his policies and the way he's acted has been very, very different. So I'd like to hear, long story short, what your perspective on that, what's changed
I'll be the
in those 8 years.
quickest on this. It's the people around him. That's the biggest difference. The people that were around him in 2016, whether they were actually working for him or whether they were in Congress, they saw a different.
Sorry.
So upset with my answer. They saw a Republican Party that looked the same as it did under George W. Bush and Reagan after Trump, right? They were like, we're going to this is going to be, you know, 4 or 8 years of a little weird situation, and then we're going to move on. Now, it's very clear that that is not happening. The Republican Party is largely and probably will never change from the changes that Donald Trump has brought to it, right? And so the people around him, for better or worse, depending on whether you like his policies or not, are people that just don't see themselves as like trying to stop him from doing things. During Trump 1.0, people would literally go and take stuff off his desk so he wouldn't do it. They would slow walk things from the agencies to his desk, thinking that he would get distracted and forget about it. And he often did, right? Now you have people around him that see their job, and from the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who's very good at her job, seeing their jobs as making sure that he gets what he wants done. And the other difference is they were given a blueprint by the Heritage Foundation and we haven't talked about it, in Project 2025, right? And it's this booklet, it's like 900 pages if you print it out, which I did, and I did not know it was 900 pages. But it's 900 pages of long-held, really, it's not Republican belief and conservative beliefs of how the federal government should work. Many of them are things they've been wanting for a long time. And so they had a blueprint to go in immediately and start doing that stuff. And you have folks that wrote some of those pages in the administration. That's the biggest thing, I think, is the people around him.
Matt, you were saying a little bit about that before. Do you want to flesh that out a bit?
Yeah, no, I totally agree about on the part of it's the people around him. I think in his first term, he was told who he should hire in a lot of ways from not from bad people, but from people that weren't necessarily looking out for his best interests. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because I worked for one of his administrative members. But I think he has surrounded himself with an incredible team of people that are mission focused and driven to achieve what the president campaigned on. And again, I think it's unprecedented having it's not unprecedented, but you know, it doesn't happen every day that you have a 4-year gap between your 2 terms.
Pretty
and you have
one other guy.
Right. Yeah. Same, but you have 4 years to figure out what didn't happen in your first term, why didn't it happen, and how can you make it happen? I mean, you're ready on day one. I mean, he was I don't think anyone up here would doubt that he was ready on day one to enact what he set out to achieve. We can all disagree. I mean, we might have disagreements on was it good or bad or how did it affect things, but I mean, just having those executive orders ready to go and having a team in place. I mean, you could just tell there's also a lot less chaos this time around in terms of the folks around him. You don't, yeah. I mean, I think in his first year last time, he might have had 3 Secretary of States or 2. I mean, it just, you have so many more, you can tell that it is his administration. And I think that goes to your question.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, and let's go to another question. It's safe to say we haven't had a president who has singularly remade his party in the way that Trump has in quite a long time. Yeah. Tell us your name and where you're from, please.
Sure. My name is Justin Daniels. I'm a DPhil here.
Okay,
but I'm
cousin Daniel.
Yeah. It's exciting. I've never actually met anyone else with my last name. I know it's a common last name, but it's exciting to meet someone else. with my
We look
last name.
exactly alike.
But I'm originally from Pennsylvania, although I spent some time living in California and then in Maryland before I came over here. I wanted to ask you about polarization. I think it's a buzzword that people like to throw around to sort of what are the issues that is facing the United States that is part of the reason why the country feels so dysfunctional sometimes. And indeed, I can say, coming from a divided household, that polarization can be a very touchy subject. And so I wanted to ask you, is it polarization? Is it simply the fact that Americans have different policy views that's the issue, and that we need to come back toward a common center on like key issues like economy or foreign policy, or is it something else about how we're doing politics that's different or that's changed?
Can I start? Because I think
please.
I think Eugene hit this so well in his second answer. It's the incentive structure in so many ways. I mean, Eugene also said this, like, what did Democrats get from 40-day holdout? Absolutely nothing. Like literally nothing.
He is not having that.
Maybe they disagree, but
What do you think? What do you think they got? Yeah, what do you think they got?
no, but
So the change of conversation.
Yeah.
It's like the people have already had the sticker shock, and Republicans have already said we're not working on it.
Yeah. No, it's,
We're gonna do this over drinks at dinner.
We have Democrats in the audience who disagree.
To give it a little bit of a caveat here, Democrats got a agreement to have a vote on healthcare, which they also had on the table on day one of the shutdown. So they got after day 40 exactly what they were offered on day one, which was a vote to extend the Obamacare subsidies that were passed under Democrat rule when Obamacare was passed. So they got that agreement. But I think that going back to the question, it's the incentive structure. The way that American campaigns are run, it's so finance dependent. How are you fundraising? And the growth of digital fundraising, that's been the biggest change over the last decade of the way that our government works. And so many members are so reliant on raising money through digital, through small dollar programs, whether it's digital or mail. And the way that you raise money is by saying more aggressive things. The people that are donating online aren't looking for the kumbaya moment of let's all work together, even though I think when members actually, I do think there is actually more of a want from members of Congress to find common areas to work together. It's just what is front and center on the news, because they're also incentivized by the clicks and by the viewership. Everything is about how do you get more people to watch, more people to engage, and agreeing doesn't do that in any of the different mediums that we work with.
Right, can I
Some shields are different than others.
to butt in there and pick up the incentive structure for raising money is the same thing for something that's just as important, which is attention.
Mhm.
And the algorithms that drive the conversation, which now television ratings kind of jump off from, only reward a more hyper partisan kind of message. And you see that happening in both parties, and the whole electorate seems to be splintering. And then you have new platforms incentivizing different extreme rhetoric. So it's all getting splintered apart. But I think on the interesting thing that I've noticed is on the policy question, it seems like, in fact, Americans do want the same basic things. I mean, the affordability message is working for whoever uses it. Some of what Bannon promotes, Steve Bannon, the president's one of his most populist kind of outside advisors, are things that were Democratic agenda items. He's for a bigger minimum wage. This tariff policy, that was a Dick Gephardt, the old Democrat policy, right? He was a tariff guy. So it seems like weirdly the policy agenda is almost becoming interchangeable as who makes the better argument and can use it for their own advantage. But But as long as those algorithms are kind of separating things out, that gets lost.
Yeah, I think, we just saw Jared Golden, a moderate Democrat from Maine, announce his retirement from Congress. And there are a slew of these folks. Don Bacon was mentioned earlier, member of Congress, Republican member of Congress from Nebraska. Brian Fitzpatrick, who Matt has worked for, is another good example of somebody who's in the middle, Republican, moderate. All of these folks face much more pressure in terms of raising money and staying in office than the people on the most extreme sides, because they have a built-in money machine that is kind of happy to be catalyzed to raise money from by these more extreme and kind of emotional appeals.
Yeah, actually, and just let me jump in here just a little bit. It's not about policy and it's not about money. It's a much more basic element of the human condition. I would refer to you, I mean, this is a whole other panel. We could spend hours talking about polarization and what causes it and why people don't agree and why they won't listen to each other. I've actually done a lot of research on this, but I would refer you to Bill Bishop's book, The Big Sort, which is sort of the seminal work written for a general audience about why we've separated ourselves into different communities, different tribes, if you will. I don't really like the word tribe, but we really have. And it has lots less to do with policy. If you get people in a room and give them a couple beers and talk about what they want, Republicans and Democrats generally agree. And it's one of the reasons why I went to work for Barack Obama, because when he would talk to people, he would say, Americans don't really want much from our government. They want a decent job at a living wage. They want, if they get sick, they don't want to go broke and lose their house. They want to be safe in their homes. They want their kids to live a better life than they did and be able to come back and work at home. And they want to be able to retire with some dignity. That's kind of it. That's the American dream. That's what people want. And if you get Republicans and Democrats in a room and talk in real basic ways, people will, I swear I've done this a lot, and people will generally agree on all these different things that they want, and not just pie in the sky. They will agree on policies. But when you challenge their tribe, when you challenge their membership in that tribe, and again, I would say, read Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, read, Bill Bishop, who am I saying that wrote The Righteousness,
My colleague, John Haidt.
Yeah, I love Jonathan Haidt.
Mm-hmm.
Read those guys, and the real cutting edge research that's being done right now is not being done by political scientists. It's being done by psychologists working through economics. Yeah. And everything I learned as an economist growing up is like out the window, because these guys have disproved everything. There is no rational man. There's none of that. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent.
I just really quickly, very short.
Another question.
The other part of it is that in America, we currently see rights as pie, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you give someone else rights, they're like, you're taking my pie. Now I have less pie, right?
Right.
Or biscuits. Y'all eat biscuits here. Y'all eat pies. But the concept is that PIE, correct. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for clarity. Yes. But that's not how it actually works. Just because we expand the idea of who has rights in this country, in our country, that does not mean you have less, right? And I think the political structure, back to the incentives, are such that people believe that to their core, that if you have something, I no longer have that thing, and that's not actually true. And I don't know how that's a psychological thing that I don't know how you get rid of, because that is such a part of our process, is that if more people have rights, if you see more people, being given access to something, you're thinking you get less access, and that's not always true. It's often not true.
That's true with economics, too.
Right, exactly.
With business, everything. Yeah, she had her hand up a long time.
I appreciate it, guys. My name is Jessica Yan. I'm here at Oxford studying sustainable enterprise. But I wanted to dig more deeply into the media question. You guys touched on this briefly earlier on financial donations and how campaigns have changed. But in the same way that FDR used the radio, Reagan used TV, Trump now seems to be using Truth Social. What are ways, and also prioritizing big tech, it seems, what are ways that the new form of information dispersal has changed policy and politics?
Jim, I'm going to let you get first shot at that question.
Well, when I started covering politics, it was really, there was everything was regulated, right? First of all, the political campaigns were often in what we had in the US, it's a matching system. So both campaigns would take matching funds and there was a limit on how much they raised and they would have the same amount of money. You had to agree to be in the system and everyone had. And so then the only way to talk to your voters other than flying around the country was television. Everything went to television. Even there, it was sort of regulated how that money was spent. It was heavily regulated. You couldn't reach millions of voters without television, right? And television was, reporters would jump on ads. We would try to fact check them. Though one of my best old Republican sources, I think it was Stuart Stevens, said, you know, why are you bothering fact checking us? So many more millions of people are seeing our ads. Like, you should just give it up. But so it wasn't a great system, but that's how it was. And so what's changed a lot is now you can reach millions of people without spending a dime, right? So by the old rules, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Hillary Clinton outspent Trump in 2016, right?
Yeah.
On television. Yeah, by a lot. And that would have been that you could almost say who was going to win an election. And by the way, I'll note that that's this whole idea of the same amount of money in advertising changed first when George W. Bush got out of the system, said, I'm going to raise money. That was a risk. He pulled it off. Then Obama went even farther. And maybe in the primaries, he was just like, because the primaries were even more regulated by how much you could spend in a state.
And then the Supreme Court, let's not forget that.
And then the Supreme Court let more money in and off to the races. So you just can communicate with people in millions of different ways. Now, I was talking to Matt about this earlier. Interestingly, television still matters. All these things still matter, but they're just ways to, what Charlie Kirk invented at Turning Point was he had ways to reach voters on behalf of his candidate. He also could run almost as a party, set in a kind of separate he had a separate group that was legally cordoned off. That ran like a party and got out the vote. So these are sea changes that I think in US politics, we're not really studying. Things are moving so fast. It's just sort of happened, but that's gigantic. It means that the press, we don't even know what's really going on half the time. I mean, not that we ever really did, but
Speak for yourself.
No, we didn't. But now we're really flying blind. We don't know what's moving voters. The information silos we were talking about, they just move in these different ways. So that's all brand new, and I don't think very well understood, but it's the undergirding of all of this.
Yeah, and certainly moving from a model where there's a lot more gatekeeping and kind of top-down communication from media sources to voters, to citizens, to a world that Trump and Mamdani, again, to put them both in the same sentence, I think they should be more in the same sentence than they typically are kind of brilliant at figuring out how to use this decentralized system that does not have gatekeepers to grab people's attention and really drive the narrative. Let's have another question. Let's see. Actually, I'm not here to pick. One of you guys can pick.
Just stand up.
Phone or
Yeah. Okay. Let us know your name and where you're from.
Hello, thank you for this wonderful conversation. My name is Sam. I'm actually from Virginia. We just got a new governor, which is good.
Get back there.
Some other Virginia.
Go Abigail. And I graduated from UVA, so go Who's. But now I'm studying here at Oxford. I have a question about the successorship problem, or I would call it a problem. Who is the successor of the MAGA movement after Trump? I suspect that he may not make it until 2028, but we'll see. Well, you know, he's getting on a bit in age. I mean,
Is it because of the rise of political violence? Or, I mean,
yeah. Hey,
McDonald's in you.
I'm in the UK, so you know I'm not in the US right now, so I can say whatever.
FBI.
Maybe this isn't particular for Matt. So, what is your opinion on this? The successorship problem? Is it a problem? Maybe it's not.
no, I definitely don't view it as a problem. I actually view it at the fact that we are having the conversation shows how many great people there are to take the mantle and run with it over the next decade. Who's on the list?
For you, yeah.
I mean, I think listen. You have to start with the vice president. Vice President J.D. Vance, I think, is doing an incredible job trying to communicate the president's agenda. He can go on any news network, whether it's a friendly one or a not friendly one, and he has no issue talking about. Well, yeah, but. You know,
You said we ain't seen him on our network.
I hear you, but you know, he is someone who has gone in unfriendly territory, not dissimilar to someone like Gavin Newsom on the Democrat side, who also has gone on unfriendly territory to begin to have a dialogue. I mean, I think that is a true any person that wants to take the mantle needs to be able to talk to all voters, and they can do it in their own way. There's many ways to do it, but showing a willingness to be able to have that conversation in unfriendly territory, I think, is a very important feature of any of the different people. And you know, you have people like Secretary of State Rubio. You have plenty of great governors out there. You have plenty of great senators out there that are looking that will, if it's not clear that it's going to be Vice President Vance, I think you'll have a very competitive primary. But at the end of the day, I think who President Trump puts his weight behind, because I on the other hand do think he's going to be very fine over the next 4 years, over the next 3 years, and he'll be able to be able to weigh in who he thinks his successor should be. But at the end of the day, Republican primary voters are going to choose. There's going to be a primary, and I expect it to put forth the best candidate for 2028.
Trump has said that it won't be Vance. Like in interviews, they've been asked, like, is he the heir apparent? And Trump's like, no, because for Trump, he's the heir apparent. Do you know what I mean? Like, I also believe he's going to pass 2028.
He hasn't said no. He said he's not ready to name.
No, when in one of the first interviews that he did, and we can fact check this, he was asked, like, is J.D. Vance the heir apparent? And he said no, and then continued talking. And he said, but I like J.D. So, like, if you can't say, and this is the same thing, the problem Joe Biden had with Vice President Harris, if you're not saying that the person that you put in that position is the person that's supposed to cement your legacy, that's an issue.
I guess there's a nuance between heir apparent and successor, but
is there?
I think so.
Well, the next thing is the other aspect of it is, whoever, if they become the heir apparent or successor of the MAGA movement, do they have the same charisma and talent to bring out voters who don't come out usually? What we've continued to see is that when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, a lot of his people stay home, right? And so that's really the question, is like, are the voters going to follow that person? Whether or not they, you know, the primary folks are going to choose that person, but are the rest of the MAGA movement going to follow them when it comes to the general election?
Yeah, and if we reach to history, you think about revolutionary presidents, FDR, Reagan, you named them, they actually don't have very successful successors who really carried the mantle of those moves. So I think actually it's a challenge for any president who is his own brand, right, who really changes the rules of the game, because he's a singular thing. And so it's a interesting challenge to see. We got time for one more question, and great.
Really, thank you so much for, I can stand up. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. I'm Louisa. I'm here studying education. Really excited to be able to listen to all of you. So my question kind of goes a little bit in what was just previously discussed. I wonder, from a historical perspective, if you think that we are in a really unique time when it comes to making sure that we have a new generation of leaders coming up. Because when I look to both parties right now, I feel like we don't have a clear successor, and we are not making a lot of time to like kind of create and breed those like young leaders in both sides, just like the reaction in Mandami in New York, and also like in the Republican side. I wonder if you think that we are in a unique period in that regard, or not really?
I mean, powerful people don't like giving up power, right? And so what we saw this week was Nancy Pelosi step down. And what I've heard and we've started to see is that there are others that are going to retire also based on her example, right? She did the same thing when she stopped being leader of the Democrats in the House. And you saw the other leaders that were there, the older ones, step down. The problem is they haven't been really cultivating, both on the Republican and Democratic side, to your point, cultivating that that bench, right? The bench exists, right? People are sitting on the bench, but the there hasn't been like a handoff. But I don't know if that's bad. Like, I don't know if it's bad that there's not been like a training ground for the next generation of leadership. Because what can someone who came up in the, I don't know, 1990s, came to power in Washington, D.C., really fully understand about how we operate right now, right? There's so no shade to the older people. Y'all have lots of wisdom. We love you. I'm not lying. But
Thank
there
you.
is, yes, we love you. But there are a lot of holes there, right? So like Nancy Pelosi cannot teach Zohran Mamdani or even Hakeem Jeffries about how Instagram is utilized in the campaign, right? And that's okay. That's not how she was brought up. She could teach him about twist arms behind closed doors, which he should learn more about. And I think the Republicans are having the same issue. It's like the world is moving so quickly, and we're having industrial revolution after industrial revolution like every 30 days. And so it is very difficult to train someone on what 2028 is going to look like, right? The first tweet, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that were on the campaign, the first tweet from like a presidential candidate was Barack Obama in 2008, right? Like, and I think they texted that they picked Joe Biden to the folks who are on their thing. So like, we don't even do that anymore. Like, there's so much change that the handing off, I think, is kind of impossible and doesn't work as well as it used to.
Can I add a historical note is that you hear carping about each party's bench. I think they both right now seem to have an okay bench. I mean, it's more visible in the administration sometimes because people in the administration, but you've got Governor Whitmer in Michigan, you've got Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I mean, they have benches, but 2 out of the last 3 Democratic presidents were really out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, Barack Obama, he was in the Senate, but coming out of really when he hit the national stage, state senator from Springfield. Bill Clinton in 92, I mean, they were calling the Democratic group, and the veterans here can correct me, but wasn't that when it was the 7 dwarves? That's what they were calling Democratic candidates. So Bill Clinton was not someone anyone was paying attention to. So there's always going to be somebody who surprises everybody. And Mamdani, I mean, who knows what Mamdani's going to do, and where he's going to end up. But you saw, and you mentioned this, the establishment did not embrace him, but it just doesn't work. The establishment doesn't decide. The voters do. And so that's where so historically, it just shows you sometimes it doesn't really matter because everyone's missing where the story's going or who's emerging.
We've got panelists from the Democratic and Republican Governors Association. I encourage everybody to look at those benches outside of DC for the future of both parties. And that is all of our time for today. Thank you.